do the kids themselves know that we're really committed to having structures that sometimes depend on smallness, but we ourselves know that being small isn't enough. In other words, we could have a small school that was still lousy. And in fact, one of our concerns in the jargon of school reform is that, you know, if all it took to be a great school was to keep the numbers down, people would have found a way to do that already.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just math. But it's not just small. And so we have 364 children from grades 7 through 12, so that's a middle and a high school combined. It is a small school, but we spend most of our time as adults trying to figure out what it means to express the ideas of knowing kids well, a deliberately spare academic program that doesn't try to cram everything into their heads by the time they graduate, a reconceptualization of what readiness for college looks like that's more based on skills and the acquisition of, I would say, a learning disposition rather than a mastery of a specific broad content. Okay? So when you go over to the school, it isn't that you're going to see kids, you know, lying around being nurtured. I think you're going to see some rigorous work going on in classrooms, but most of our teaching has been pared down. And there's a lot of tension around that. That goes directly to the common principle that says the school will make no attempt to be comprehensive in its curriculum. And the aphorism, less is more, shall apply. That in a very real way, that's one of the most dynamic and tension-producing principles that we are committed to, because we have a very, very smart faculty. I'm sure you all know what it means to feel like you've got really brilliant adults here for the purpose of doing teaching. The problem that creates is we all feel passionately about what we teach. We all have decided that if what we love to teach isn't important, we're not interested. So one of the underground or very essential tenets for us is to learn to collaborate effectively together so that we can have critical conversations not only about what we will teach, but about what we won't teach. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Because we go in knowing we can't teach everything. Mm-hmm. Because the kids will be so overwhelmed and exhausted that we will have squandered the structures that we're so committed to. Mm-hmm.
Making that choice, is there a conflict between what the exams demand and what you teach the children?
To a certain extent. We have a state-mandated exit exam called MCAS. Do you know of this? It's a Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System. It's called the MCAS test. It is the exit test for all high school students in the state. They have to get a certain score in mathematics and English language arts in a 10th grade testing situation. The state says, in order to receive a diploma. The graduation requirements from this school are easily 5 times more rigorous than the graduation requirements of the state. However, the state says that as a public school, if our students don't pass the MCAS test, I can't give them a diploma. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's what the state says. When our children take their test, we're very conscious at our school of the tests in some way are in diametric opposition to our philosophy of teaching. Somehow, with the English language arts test, there's been enough consensus and collaboration on the formulation of that test where it actually is an okay vehicle. We're not happy that the state says there's a high-stakes test that would deny a child a diploma. But when we look at the test of the English language arts, it's not a bad test. It's mostly testing critical thinking and students' ability to do some things we believe in and teach them. It's skill-based. How to make inferences, how to make deductions, how to demonstrate comprehension and understanding, how to use the mechanics and conventions of the language. We teach that. The test offers literature passages for children to respond to. Rather than saying, here's the canon of literature, we're going to test your ability to remember everything from that canon. So in concept, it's not a problem. Again, I'm not in favor of one mechanism for determining a child's readiness, but our children don't seem, it's not a big conflict for us to give them that assessment as one measure. And we use the data from those tests in a lot of ways. We try and analyze where our kids are sailing through and where they have a little trouble, so it can be useful for us. In the mathematics test, the same thing is becoming more and more true. Initially, when our kids were taking the math test and scoring lower, we had to figure out what in the test was not being presented in our curriculum and then decide, was it a change we needed to make in our program? And about 5 or 6 years ago, what we determined was it wasn't so much that the kids weren't ready to take the test. It's that the way the skills were being asked for in the test were much different from the language that was used to frame doing those skills in the classroom. So it was actually quite useful for us because what we learned was we weren't using the same language as the test, and with a couple of changes and with a focus on not disadvantaging the kids on the test, it was actually easy for us to see that the kids just weren't decoding the questions accurately enough. They knew how to do it, they just weren't being used to being asked in that way.
Oh.
So
Training.
For the last 3 or 4 years, I mean, it was just great to be able to sort of unpack it to the extent where we said, oh, we're not too far apart here. So over the past 3 or 4 years, we have had from 0 failures on both tests to, and that was for the prior 2 years, we had absolutely all the 10th graders pass, which meant we had to dedicate no time to remediating or retesting subsequently, because the kids have to retest until they pass. This year we had 1 student in each area who has to be retested. So, and they're this week actually, those retests. So we have 1 child in the math who's taking the test over because he missed by 1 point, and 1 student in English who's taking the test again because he missed by 2 points. So we've done, you know, some stuff without, I think, trying to make the kid feel like everything is about the test. That they're going to take the test again and probably do just fine.
Do you monitor the graduates when they go to college?
Well, subjectively. So we've had 6 classes graduate.
But you don't have an idea of how this system affected the children comparing to other children from regular schools?
We ourselves don't have any quantitative longitudinal study. With only 6 classes, it's not a statistically viable sample, but because we're in the Coalition of Essential Schools with 1,200 schools trying in whatever way to express these principles, there is now a longitudinal study in effect that is tracking kids over 10 years. What I can tell you about Parker graduates is that we have a lot of anecdotal and subjective qualitative data because the kids come back in droves. Every December we have an alumni day, and ever since the first class graduated, it's just gotten larger and larger and larger, the numbers of kids. Now we've had 2 of our classes graduate, 3 of our classes graduate college. And our students who go to school, they tend to finish. They tend to be very consumeristic about their education. They come back and they do a panel discussion for the oldest kids in the school, giving them advice and sharing their experiences about how their education at Parker prepared them for college. We pump them for information. We have a lot of data, but we don't have any scientific
From-
What do
studies.
they say? What do they